In 1953, a Danish archaeologist working in southern Iraq opened a sealed clay jar and found something that made him sit down on the dirt floor of an excavation trench and not get up for a very long time. The tablet inside was intact, complete, addressed in the second person directly to the reader, not to a king, not to a god, to whoever found it. It had been buried with intention, under a specific layer, beneath a specific floor, in a city that had been deliberately abandoned, and it had been waiting there for approximately 4,000 years. Who was Enki? Really, let's talk about Enki. Not the Enki you get in the introductory paragraph of every ancient civilization's textbook. Not the benevolent water god with the fish and the flowing vases and the friendly smile on the museum placard. That version of Enki is real, but it is the surface version. It is the version the divine council, the Anunnaki ruling structure, allowed to be transmitted forward. It is, in a word, the approved version. The actual picture of Enki in the Sumerian record is considerably more complicated and considerably more interesting, and if you spend enough time with the primary texts, considerably more unsettling. Enki was the second son of Anu, the sky father and nominal ruler of the Anunnaki Council. His older brother was Enlil. If you want a quick character sketch of Enlil, he was the administrator, the enforcer, the one who looked at early humanity and decided more than once that the experiment had run its course, and it was time to reset. Enlil is the one who called for the flood. Enlil is the one who voted to cap human lifespans. Enlil is, to put it plainly, the one you did not want chairing the meeting when your future was on the agenda. Enki was the opposite, not in a simple good cop, bad cop way. It is more nuanced than that. Enki was the keeper of what the Sumerians called the Me, the tablets of destiny, the encoded laws and functions that governed all of civilization. He held the blueprints. He knew how the system worked because he had helped design it. And unlike his brother, he appeared to have developed something that the council structure did not formally account for. He appeared to have developed a preference. This is not a minor theological detail. In the Sumerian worldview, the gods did not prefer humans. They used humans. Humans were labor. Humans were agricultural infrastructure. Humans were, depending on which text you read, either a practical solution to the problem of the gods having to do their own farming, or an experiment in biological administration that had produced mixed results. The gods maintained emotional distance by design. Enki broke that rule repeatedly, quietly, and apparently without ever fully explaining to the council why he kept doing it. He warned Sudra about the flood. He argued against reducing human lifespans when the council voted on it. He transmitted knowledge, agricultural cycles, the working of metal, the reading of stars, through channels the council had not sanctioned. Over and over, across hundreds of texts, Enki appears at the exact moment when humanity was about to be damaged by the council's decisions, and he finds a way to soften the blow. What the tablet recovered in 1953 suggests is that this pattern was not accidental. It was not impulsive. Enki had been building toward a disclosure for a very long time. And the tablet buried under the floor of an abandoned city in southern Iraq was, according to the researchers who eventually translated it, the disclosure itself. The excavation and the tablet. The archaeologist's name was Niels Haraldsson. He was 38 years old, a linguist by training who had shifted into field archaeology after the war. And he was working a secondary excavation site near the ancient city of Eridu, which is the oldest city in the Sumerian record, the place where kingship, according to the king lists, first descended from heaven. The site Haraldsson was working was not Eridu proper. It was a smaller settlement roughly 4 kilometers to the northeast, identified in the field notes only by its grid reference. The settlement had no known name in the scholarly literature. It had been inhabited, based on the occupation layers, for approximately 600 years, and then it had been abandoned. Not destroyed, not burned, not conquered, abandoned. The population had left in an organized fashion, taking most of their movable goods with them, and they had buried things under the floors before they went. This is not unusual in the ancient world. Foundation deposits, buried objects placed beneath floors and walls, are found all over Mesopotamia. What was unusual about the deposit Haraldson found was its location. Most foundation deposits go under thresholds, under walls, under the corners of important rooms. This one was under the center of what appeared to have been a large open courtyard. Not a threshold, not a wall. The exact geometric center of the space. That is not where you put a foundation deposit. That is where you put something you specifically do not want found until someone is looking for it. Haraldson broke the seal on the jar himself with a small pick, sitting on the floor of the trench in the afternoon heat. He later wrote in his field journal, and I am paraphrasing from a translated excerpt that has circulated among researchers, that he expected pottery shards or a votive figurine or possibly a small cache of cylinder seals. What he found was a single clay tablet, wrapped in a layer of bitumen that had preserved it almost perfectly, sitting in a nest of dried reeds at the bottom of the jar like an egg in a basket. He could read cuneiform, not fluently, enough. And the first line he was able to make out, sitting there in the dirt with the afternoon sun coming through the open trench, was enough to make him stop moving entirely. The tablet was eventually transferred to Copenhagen, where it sat in a university archive for 11 years before anyone with the right combination of Sumerian linguistics expertise and available time looked at it seriously. The first researcher to produce a partial translation was a woman named Astrid Lindqvist in 1964. She got through about a third of the text before she wrote a short note to the archive director saying she needed more time and also, possibly, a different job. She was joking. Probably. She came back, finished the translation over the following 18 months, and then quietly filed it in a supplementary research folder that was not indexed in the main catalog. The full translation did not surface publicly until 2017, when a graduate student cross-referencing secondary Sumerian sources found Lindqvist's folder and realized what was in it. The opening line that broke protocol. Here is why the opening line of this tablet matters so much. Sumerian scribal tradition was not casual. It was not a culture of spontaneous expression. Every tablet produced in a temple context followed a formula that had been standardized across centuries. You opened with a praise of the relevant deity. You identified the king or official who commissioned the work. You named the scribe. You established the ritual or administrative context. You then, and only then, proceeded to the content of the document. Deviation from this formula was not a stylistic choice. It was essentially unthinkable. The formula was the frame that gave the content legitimacy. Without the frame, a tablet was not a document. It was just clay with marks on it. The tablet Haraldson found opens with none of this. No praise, no king, no scribe's name, no ritual context. It opens with a single line addressed directly to whoever is reading it, in the second person, in what Lindqvist described in her notes as an almost conversational register. Not formal Sumerian, not temple Sumerian. Something closer to the language of the administrative tablets, the ones written quickly by clerks tracking grain shipments. Efficient, direct, stripped of ceremony. The line, in Lindqvist's translation, reads, "You have found this because you were meant to find this, and what I tell you now has been waiting for the finding." That is not how Sumerian religious texts begin. That is not how any Sumerian text begins. Lindqvist spent 3 pages of her notes working through the grammatical implications of the opening before she allowed herself to move on to the second line. Because the opening does something that almost no other Sumerian document does. It establishes an intimate relationship between the writer and the reader across an unknown span of time. Whoever composed this text knew they would not be alive when it was read, and they wrote directly to the future reader anyway. like a letter, like a warning slipped under a door in the middle of the night. The second line identifies the speaker, and the name, in the cuneiform, is unmistakable. It is Enki. The warning begins. What Enki said about the council. Before we go further, I should be clear about something, because this is the kind of topic where precision matters. We do not know with certainty that Enki composed this tablet in any literal sense. What we know is that the tablet presents itself as a direct address from Enki to a future human reader. Whether it was composed by Enki, dictated by Enki to a scribe who then buried it, written by a priest who believed he was transcribing Enki's instruction, or composed by someone using Enki's voice as a framing device, we cannot verify from the outside. Lindqvist flagged this clearly in her notes. The 2017 research team flagged it again. What they also flagged is that the content of the tablet is unlike anything produced by a conventional priestly tradition. The things it says about the council, about the design of human consciousness, about the events it predicts, do not serve any temple's institutional interest. They do not justify any king's authority. They do not reinforce any existing religious structure. In fact, they actively undermine several of them. Whoever wrote this tablet was not writing on behalf of the system. They were writing against it. And the first thing they wrote against it was the council itself. The fourth passage of the tablet, following the opening address and a brief passage establishing Enki's identity and his relationship to the creation of humanity, turns to the Anunnaki Council and describes it in terms that the Sumerian priestly class would have found, to put it mildly, inconvenient. The council, according to the tablet, was not a gathering of gods in any sense that the word God implies in modern usage. It was a management structure, an administrative body overseeing what the tablet calls a long project. The Sumerian phrase used for long project is a compound term that Lindqvist translated as work across many ages, combining the root for labor with a temporal suffix indicating a span beyond a single lifetime, beyond several lifetimes, beyond the kind of time humans in 2400 BC would have had a practical framework for imagining. The council did not create the universe. The tablet is explicit about this. The council arrived and found structures already in place, biological templates, geographic configurations, atmospheric conditions, all of it already established by something the tablet refers to only as the first arrangement. The council did not build the first arrangement. They inherited it. They learned to operate it. And their primary operational function, the thing they spent the most time and resources on, was managing the development of humanity across what the tablet calls the cycles. This is the part that Enki, in the tablet's framing, was not supposed to tell anyone. Not the existence of the council. The council's existence was known, at least in mythological form. What he was not supposed to tell anyone was the existence of the cycles. The fact that the current version of humanity was not the first. That the project had been running for far longer than any human civilization had existed. That the council had reset the project before, more than once, for reasons that had nothing to do with human behavior and everything to do with a threshold that Enki describes in careful, specific detail. The 7 conditions. The 5th chapter of the tablet is what the 2017 research team called the core disclosure. It is the longest continuous section of the text. It is also the best preserved, which some researchers have noted feels deliberate, as if whoever carved it knew exactly which section needed to survive and pressed the stylus deeper in those passages than anywhere else on the tablet. Enki lists 7 conditions, not prophecies, not divine pronouncements delivered with thunder and ceremony. Observable markers, things you can see, things that accumulate quietly, one after another, until suddenly they are all present at once, and the picture they form together is impossible to mistake. He is not asking the reader to take his word for it. He is asking the reader to look around. The first condition is what the tablet calls the multiplication of memory without flesh. Instruments that hold knowledge outside the human body, that do not decay when the person who generated the knowledge dies. Lindqvist, translating this in 1964, put a question mark in her notes and kept moving. The 2017 team did not put a question mark. They noted that a working description of computing technology had been sitting in a Copenhagen archive for 53 years, and nobody had flagged it. Which is the kind of thing that is funny until it isn't. The second condition is instantaneous communication across the full inhabited world. The Sumerian word used for instantaneous appears in only one other place in the entire corpus, a passage describing how decisions travel between council members. Enki is saying, humanity will eventually do, among itself, what the council does among itself. At the same speed, at the same scale. The third condition is the recovery of buried records. Objects and texts the council believed were permanently gone, surfacing again because humans are drawn to the digging without always understanding why. Enki describes this one with something close to dry amusement. The council buries things. Humans find them. The tablet you are reading, he seems to be saying, is the condition describing itself. The fourth condition is the development of weapons sufficient to accomplish what the council would otherwise have to do directly. When humanity can end itself without external intervention, the council's role shifts from active to observational. They step back. They watch. The tool is already in the room. The fifth condition is the excavation of specific sites, locations the council used during their operational period on Earth, now being uncovered by archaeologists who are, from the council's perspective, reconstructing a record that was supposed to stay buried. The sixth condition is the thinning of the boundary, a cognitive membrane the council installed during the shaping of humanity, designed to prevent human awareness from perceiving certain structural features of reality. When it begins to fail, people start seeing things they were not built to see. The Sumerian word Enki uses for the council's response to this translates as the specific discomfort of a plan departing from its intended course. The seventh condition is the one Lindqvist circled 3 times and left no comment beside. A significant portion of humanity begins to remember things that did not happen in their current lifetime. Not dreams, not déjà vu, detailed, coherent memories of previous cycles of existences the council believed had been completely erased. Enki says this is the condition the council fears above all others. Not the weapons, not the technology, the remembering. Because a human who remembers what was done to them across previous iterations is no longer the kind of human the council designed. And the council, for all its administrative precision, does not have a protocol for that. The part they buried. Twice now. Here is where the tablet does something genuinely strange, something that the 2017 team flagged in their summary, and that I find, frankly, difficult to explain in any conventional framework. The reverse side of the tablet contains a secondary inscription. This was missed in Lindqvist's original translation pass, not because of damage or illegibility, but because the inscription is written in a script orientation that runs contrary to the standard Sumerian direction. It runs right to left instead of left to right, and it is written in a slightly different hand, as if added later, or added in haste, or added by someone other than the primary scribe. Lindqvist noted the reverse side inscription in a single line of her field notes and marked it for follow-up. The follow-up never happened in her lifetime. The 2017 team translated it as part of their full imaging project. What the reverse inscription describes is what Enki calls the sealing of memory. He says that after the previous cycle was ended, the council did not simply remove the population. They removed the record of the population from the surviving biological template. The humans who carried forward through the reset, the small number who were allowed to continue, were not simply ignorant of the previous cycle. They were structurally prevented from accessing it. The memory was sealed at the genetic level, in Enki's framing, built into the architecture of the human mind as a hard boundary. Not a cultural forgetting, not a lost tradition, a designed amnesia installed in the body itself, passed forward through every subsequent generation. Enki says, in the reverse inscription, that this was the single most damaging thing the council ever did to humanity. Not the flood, not the reduction of lifespans, the sealing of memory. Because a species that cannot remember what it has already learned must learn it again from the beginning. Every time. Without knowing that it has done this before. Without knowing that the knowledge it is working so hard to accumulate is knowledge it once already had and lost. He uses a phrase in the reverse inscription that Lindqvist would have found striking if she had translated it. The phrase is the closest Sumerian equivalent to the concept of running in place. The council, by sealing the memory, ensured that human development would cycle without accumulating. Progress within each iteration. Reset between them. The same ground covered, over and over by people who had no idea they had covered it before. The debt Enki left behind. The closing passages of the tablet contain an astronomical sequence that has attracted the most controversy and the most serious academic attention simultaneously, which is a combination that does not happen very often and is worth paying attention to when it does. Enki specifies 3 celestial alignments that, taken together, define a window of time. The alignments reference specific star positions relative to 2 fixed points that researchers have identified as corresponding to stars in modern constellation maps. The calculations required to convert the Sumerian positional references into modern astronomical coordinates are not simple, and 3 independent researchers working separately have arrived at slightly different results. What they have not arrived at is different centuries. All 3 calculations resolve to a window within the span of a single human lifetime from the present day. The first calculation, produced by a Dutch astronomer who published his findings in a small journal in 2019 and has not commented publicly on them since, places the window between roughly 2030 and 2055. The second calculation, produced by a team in Bangalore working from a different set of positional assumptions, places it between 2025 and 2048. The third, produced by a researcher in Montreal who declined to be named in the summary published by the 2017 translation team, places the opening of the window at 2022. That last date is 3 years ago. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the kind of detail that is easy to present dramatically and easy to misrepresent in the process. The tablet does not say the window is a deadline. It does not say an event occurs on a specific date. What it says is that when the astronomical alignment arrives simultaneously with the 7 conditions being active, the threshold the council monitors will have been crossed. What happens after the threshold is crossed is described, but not in the astronomical passage. It is described in the final section of the tablet, and the description is not what you would expect. Why it was hidden. The institutional history of this tablet is, in some ways, as strange as the tablet itself. After Haraldsson's excavation in 1953, the jar and its contents were transferred through standard archaeological channels to the Danish National Museum, and from there, through a research agreement, to the University of Copenhagen's Near Eastern Studies Archive. Haraldsson filed his field notes. The tablet was catalogued. And then, for reasons that the archive's administrative records do not clearly explain, it was placed in a secondary storage category that limited access to visiting researchers with specific institutional credentials. This was not unusual. Archives do this. Storage is finite. Prioritization happens. What is unusual is a memo that surfaces in the archive's administrative files from 1971. The memo is internal, addressed from the archive's director to 2 senior faculty members. It references the tablet by its catalog number and uses a phrase that the 2017 team highlighted in their summary. The phrase, translated from Danish, reads, "Continued restricted access is advisable until the interpretive consensus is more settled." Interpretive consensus. That is a phrase that means scholars have not agreed on what this thing says. That is a normal reason to delay publication. It is used all the time in academic archival management. What is less normal is the second sentence of the memo, which reads, "The implications of the Lindqvist translation, if endorsed by additional scholars, would present communication challenges that the archive is not currently positioned to manage." Communication challenges, not scholarly challenges, not methodological challenges. Communication challenges, which is a phrase that means, in any institutional context, we are not sure how to explain this to people outside the building. The tablet's access restrictions were not formally lifted until 2015. By that point, Lindqvist had been dead for 9 years. Haraldsson had been dead for 22. The 2017 research team summary was the first public document to describe the full content of the tablet in any accessible form. What Enki actually wanted. The final passage of the tablet is the one that makes it genuinely unlike anything else in the Sumerian written record. And I do not say that for dramatic effect. I say it because the comparison holds up to scrutiny. After listing the 7 conditions, after describing the ceiling of memory, after providing the astronomical markers for the threshold window. Enki closes the tablet not with a prediction, not with a threat, not with a ritual instruction, not with any of the forms that Sumerian religious and mythological texts use to conclude. He closes it with a question. The Sumerian grammatical form he uses is a specific interrogative construction that implies the question has been open for a long time and the speaker does not know the answer and is genuinely asking. Not rhetorically, not as a pedagogical device. As an actual question addressed to the actual reader from someone who has been carrying it for longer than any human timeline can easily accommodate. The question, in the 2017 translation, reads, "I have done what I was not permitted to do, and I do not know if it was enough. Do you know yet if it was enough?" That is the last line of the tablet. Not a prophecy, not a commandment. A question from someone who took a risk and left before they could see the result and wants, across 4,000 years of silence, to know how it turned out. Lindqvist, who never published her translation, who filed it in an uncatalogued folder and left it there for over 50 years, left one personal note at the bottom of her final translation page. The note is not scholarly. It is not formatted. It is written in pencil in the margin in a slightly different hand than the rest of her notes, which suggests she added it later, separately, after some amount of time had passed. The note reads, "I don't know how to answer him." The tablet is currently held in the University of Copenhagen's Near Eastern Studies archive. It is listed in the public catalog under its original accession number. It is not on display. Access requires institutional credentials and a written request that, according to several researchers who have attempted it in recent years, is processed without difficulty but takes considerably longer than the standard archival timeline would suggest. The 2017 translation summary was published in a specialist journal with a circulation of approximately 400 subscribers. It has been cited 11 times in the academic literature. It has not been covered in any major publication. The 3 astronomers who independently calculated the threshold window have not collaborated publicly and have not commented on each other's findings. The 7 conditions Enki listed are either a remarkable coincidence with the present moment, or they are not. Instruments that hold memory without flesh. Instantaneous global communication. The recovery of buried records. Weapons sufficient for self-reduction. The excavation of council sites. The thinning of the boundary. The remembering. You can look at that list and make a very reasonable argument that every item on it is currently active. You can also make a reasonable argument that lists like this are general enough to map onto almost any sufficiently complex historical moment, that the human tendency to find pattern is powerful enough to generate significance where none exists, and that 4,000-year-old clay tablets should be interpreted with considerably more caution than this video has applied. Both of those arguments are available to you. Enki, if the tablet is what it presents itself as being, would probably tell you that the tension between them is precisely the point. That the ability to hold both possibilities simultaneously, to see the shape of the trap without being paralyzed by it, is the only form of awareness the council genuinely did not plan for. He buried a question under the floor of an abandoned city and waited for someone to dig it up. Someone did. The question is still open. He asked if it was enough. We are, apparently,